Welcome to the Empowered Working Mom Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Jocelyn Auyeung. Our podcast mission is to share stories from all working moms, whether you work outside the home or a stay-at-home mom. We believe everyone has a unique story and that we found that storytelling is a powerful way to connect and learn from each other. Because sharing and listening to each other's stories allows each of us to feel connected, supported, and inspired. And we're super excited to bring you diverse stories from fellow working moms like you. So go ahead and grab your favorite drink, get cozy, and listen in to today's story to feel acknowledged, encouraged, and most importantly, that you're not alone in this experience as a working mom. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Hey there, working moms. Welcome to another episode here on the Empowered Working Mom Revolution podcast. And I'm super excited to share today's conversation and story with you. We have my colleague and friend, Bree Overly, back here on the podcast. If you've been a listener for a while since this podcast started, when it was called Jamming with Jocelyn, she was on the show back then, and she is returning today to share her story. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about her. She is a coach for parents of gifted, twice exceptional neurodivergent children. Her primary focus is coaching clients to help them understand their parenting experience, navigate the unique approach to parenting their children's needs, and raise awareness of their own needs. By training, Bree is a certified life coach and has a master's degree in education. She has an inherent interest in learning, deep personal growth, mindfulness, and the human experience. If you want to follow Bree herself, you can find her on Instagram at @FindBreeOverly. All one word over there on Instagram. And you can find her and connect with her on LinkedIn as well. I'll include those links to Instagram and LinkedIn in the show notes. And also, she also has a service that she would like to share with you that she'll be sharing at the end of the show. And I'll include those links as well in the show notes. So grab a cup of coffee, get cozy, and let's dive into Bree's story today. Let's dive right in. So welcome, Bree, to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, and I'm so excited because I know a little bit about your background and how you came to be and doing the work that you're doing. But I'd love for you to share with our audience about, what is a significant moment or several significant moments that led you to the work that you do right now as a working mom, and what are some of the let's start with that. What are some of the significant moments or moment that led you to the work that you do as a working mom?
Yeah. Well, so I will say, before I had my child, I have an only child, and she's 14 now. So it's been a journey. It's not new, I guess, is what I'm saying. So I had her at 38. And so I was already, on a career path, and I was working full time. And so when I had her, the idea was I would just go back full time again. But I found that when that time came, that I began to notice what was happening for her. I was noticing what was happening for me. And, we had her in a daycare. And one of the first things that I struggled with as a working mom was, okay, wait, my child doesn't seem to be doing that well with a 5-day daycare experience. And so I actually went back full time, and then I pulled back on my hours, at least temporarily. So honestly, there were many back and forth moments in the first few years of my daughter's life where I was like, do I want to work full time? I kind of have to work full time because of the kind of work that I was doing. And just really exploring in an angsty way, if I'm honest, about what felt right and what she might need and what I might need. And so it wasn't like a slam dunk, like, oh, I'm just going to quit my job, because I didn't have that option. I mean, I needed to work. We needed to have two incomes. And the work I was doing was what I knew. I was working in higher education, doing student support. Eventually, I moved into human resources. I've always been about people. I've always wanted to be in some sort of advisor, mentor, counselor type role. And so that was always like floating in the background. And so a lot of what I had to do was think about my needs along with my daughter's needs. And I was thinking about this last night in terms of significant moments. And one of the things that happened to me is that my anxiety got so high that I really needed to think twice about how I was caring for myself. And I actually, when my daughter was about 4, I started taking medication for anxiety. And for me, that was a really scary decision. It was not an easy thing to do. And it changed my life when I did make that decision. And I'd been in therapy for a long time, kind of working through like, it's like the normal stuff, like family of origin stuff, and like my stress about work and my stress about parenting. And it's like, it was like a place where I could get out what was inside me.
Mm-hmm.
And it just took me a number of years before I was like, okay, like some things have significantly changed because of therapy. And then there's things that just haven't changed. So what's going on there? And my husband, had said, like, I'm just so sorry you have so much angst, and anyway. And so one thing led to another, and I decided to take what felt like a big leap in taking some medication for anxiety. And that was a really, really significant moment. Like, I can't underscore that enough. Because for me, it made a huge difference for the, I think, ability to go out on a limb and try something new. And that eventually, after, and this is a long period actually, but I eventually did pursue my desire to do something in the counseling realm. And that was to become a life coach. But that was in like 2020. And I started my anxiety medication in like 2013. So it took me a number of years. But part of that is like you have a young child, you're just, it's a journey. Life is a journey. And so it's like following breadcrumbs. But really, it started with needs. Like, what are my daughter's true needs? What are my needs? How am I doing? And really thinking about that this wasn't just about muscling through and white knuckling things, which I had done actually for a long time. And then eventually I made a new choice.
Yeah. There's so many things in there that you shared about your journey in the significant moment, like the things where I could see so many I resonate too with your story, but also I'm thinking about all our other working moms who are listening in today about that moment when you become a mom and you've been working full time, that choice. And there's just, as you were speaking, I could feel myself a lot of the emotions that probably were underlying that choice or that decision making or just that thought process. Like there's, for me, I'll speak for myself, but like there's guilt or there's shame or there's like, the anxiety, the angst of like, what is the best decision? And I love what you said, where you were like getting curious, what are my needs, her needs, my daughter's needs, and my family's needs. And so it's almost like a holistic, perspective of being able to help you make a decision of terms of your work at that time in your life. But I also loved how you shared like, anxiety, like you can go through therapy and therapy is a very supportive place for that. And I also really appreciate just your authenticity and honesty about taking that big leap of medication, right? And how there's a lot that comes with that too, as well. So I've experienced that in my own family, not myself, but I can I just really like honor your sharing about that and being really real about that with me and everyone who's listening about taking that, action and making that decision, and that being a significant moment, that there is no like shame or guilt or anything in terms of what society wants to make you feel, wants to make us feel about making those decisions that is right for you.
Yeah.
So after you made that decision, right, you're like, I've gone through therapy. This is what I need moving forward. I heard that it was like almost the door that opened up to what you are doing now, but it's a journey.
Yeah.
It took, yeah. Tell me a little bit more about that 7-year period, like that 7-year period that led you to 2020 to become a life coach, which is where Bree and I met.
Yeah. Full disclosure.
Yes, full disclosure. So I would love to hear about that, just that journey as a working mom, like transitioning between your career that you had for a long time and then into what you are doing now. So I think that, between you and I, we both have switched careers.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but for me, it was really scary.
Yeah.
Right? You go, switching from something that you're really good at or you've done for a long time, like over a decade, and then to do something brand new. Like, I would love to hear your experience in getting to that point and making those decisions.
Yeah. Well, first of all, honestly, when I started taking the medication, it truly felt like a miracle and how it impacted me. Just my ability to not be anxious all the time. And let me just be full disclosure, I still work with anxiety. So I meditate, I do other things to help me with that, you know, generalized anxiety. If I'm just being honest, like that's what I have. I have generalized anxiety. And the anxiety medicine made it possible for me to start doing more in my life. But it doesn't mean that the anxiety's gone. It means that it's managed. And I just feel like that's really important because it's not like, it's not that black and white, I guess. It's not like a binary in that way. But the first thing I did, honestly, and this isn't necessarily a career related thing, but I think that these are the things that we begin to discover about ourselves when we start to really pay attention to our needs, is I went, I got together with a friend and we walked a half marathon together. It was a half marathon, part of the Seattle Marathon. And that was huge for me. It was huge, not only because of physical challenge of walking 13 miles, but it was also the time away from my family, which for me was a big part of my challenge as a parent, was even just being able to be like, I can leave and I can do something for myself that's not work, and I can find time to go and walk with my friend and train essentially for this thing that I wanted to do. So that was my first thing that was truly felt like new and that I wouldn't have done if I hadn't cared for myself in that way, in terms of taking medication. And then with the back and forth that I was having about work in terms of how do I balance things, I was finding it really hard to feel like I was there for my daughter in the way I wanted to be in the long term. So what I really wanted, and I chose, I guess, to be clear about what I wanted. And I think that that's one of the most powerful things that we can do as humans, is just to declare what we want, be honest with ourselves. But what I really wanted was to be able to pick my daughter up from school. Like when she started elementary school, I wanted to pick her up from school. And I was finding that the idea of working less than full time felt so much better for me. And this was around the time that I was starting to take medication. I was starting to clarify for myself, what I needed. And I did go down in hours and then I went back up. And that was kind of what I did, was I went down and then went back up. And then I was like, no, I need to make this change. And so then I got a new job that was like set at 30 hours a week. And it was still at the university. I moved into a new position. And so that was very soon after I had started medication. And so and I'm not trying to like harp on medication, like, oh, this is the thing. I'm not at all pushing it. Everybody's got their own process. There's lots of things you can do. But for me, paying attention to that anxiety was a first step in me beginning to make additional steps to one, lower the number of hours a week that I worked. And then to be able to request maybe additional time off from time to time in order to care for my daughter as her needs became more and more apparent. So she's neurodivergent. She started struggling in school when she was about 8. And so there was a lot of work that we had to do as parents to tend to her, to get her what she needed so that she could, feel like she was doing well. And, that's been a long journey too. And so anyway, having a job with a little less work hours helped me a lot. But I continued to experience just dissatisfaction with my work. And so just as I was like trying to understand what was happening for my daughter, I was also like recognizing like my own needs again. And I'm using the word needs very clearly from where I am today. Like at that time, I may not have thought about it quite in the same way. I think we're always faced with, what does our child need? What do I need? What does my husband or partner need? What does my parents need? Because sometimes people are supporting their parents in some form. So, but I'm really clear on that now because I think that that's a lot of what it comes down to. It's like, what do I need? What do I need so that I am feeling like I'm not dying? I mean, that sounds terrible, but like when you get really burdened by life, sometimes you feel that way. Sometimes you feel like, oh my God, do I have to do this again? And sometimes you say, yes, I have to do this again. Like I have to go to work today, even though I would rather take a big long vacation. I would rather quit. But you make decisions along the way that are for your needs and for the family's needs. And eventually it got to a point for me where I recognize like, okay, I can keep doing this work. This is administrative work, essentially, at the university. Is great security. There's a lot that comes with it that's great for a family. Or I can begin to create a new career for myself. And if I don't do the new career, then I can just see my life force kind of going out. Like, and I wouldn't really die. It wasn't that. It was that I just could see myself like, I don't know, becoming not a vibrant person, if that makes sense. And so just like it was difficult for me to go and do that 13-mile half marathon walk, it was really difficult for me to make the decision to enter the coaching program, in part because it meant I was going to be going away for a whole weekend because we had an in-person retreat for the first part of the program. And that was a really big decision. So there was that going away from my family, and there was the money. It was kind of like, oh my God, do I really have this money? And then it was like, but I do believe that I have enough that I can make this work, and I need to invest in myself. And so I did. And now I'm a parent coach for parents like me who have neurodivergent kids who really need support. And there's a lot more to the story, but that's kind of at least part of it, part of the process of the 7 years that got me to where I am today.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like totally like nodding my head as you're sharing because I'm like, that is very similar to the process I had to. And like when you're talking about needs, I really appreciate how you shared, like, when you say needs, right? There's needs of like, there needs to be like, you have to do it because you have to go to work because you gotta pay the bills. But then there's also like another type of need that is like fills, I don't know the phrase, fills your cup. Like it like gives you that life energy,
Yeah.
that vibrancy that you were talking about. Like there's two, like I'm hearing like at each moment as a working mom, it's like, okay, like making those decisions and being clear of those two kinds of needs. Like, do I, like, do I want to be working? Do I want to wake up and do work right now? Not really. I do want to be lying on the beach having margarita, right? That's what, but I need, I need to support and help my husband support the family, right? Like that is a need, but also I have a need that I need rest. Like I need my time. And I'm hearing like, for you, is like, look, identifying those things and making your decisions
Mm-hmm.
based on those two kinds of like needs, but also being really clear.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think as you were talking, the thing that was coming up for me is I am a reflective person. So
Mhm.
I have, for as long as I can remember, I have had a practice of journaling. Sometimes it's gone away for a little while. I mean, I'm not going to say that I've journaled every day of my life because I have not, but I'm just a reflective person. And I also have a real drive for purpose. So, meaning like the work I do in the world, I want to feel like there's a purpose behind it. And I think all the times that the jobs that I've had, I have felt there is purpose behind it. But I think that it's sort of this idea of a calling, like those things that you continue to return to, you continue to return to. There's sort of this cycle. And I think a lot of times because people do have circumstances in their lives that make it difficult for them to pursue those flames inside of us that, and whether that's a calling or a need or what it is, but the thing that life force kind of thing,
Mhm.
I think it can feel like it's easier to just shut it down. And I think that that's what I was recognizing at that point in my life when I made the decision to pursue the life coaching. I'd done research about like psychology programs, like to become a therapist. I'd also researched life coaching programs. And so it'd been a couple years of like sitting with the idea and trying to figure out the right approach. And I even had a moment where it's like, well, I can keep just being that listening ear for people because that's just what I did. And I was kind of like, I recognized that that was an option. I could keep doing the thing that I'd been doing for the income, and I could still do the meaningful, like listening to people and being there. But it just didn't settle right. And I was like, so in my reflection on this, like I came to that point where I felt like there was enough support in my life that I felt like I could take a leap. And
Mhm.
so that's important. I want to be really clear that I have a pretty supportive life. I mean, I definitely have things in my life that are challenging, whether it be the parenting. And parenting has
Mhm.
been very, very challenging. My daughter is twice exceptional, which is a whole concept in and of itself.
Mhm.
But essentially, it creates a complexity in a human being and often a lot of extremes that make parenting kind of an extra intense sport, so to speak. I think of it as like extreme sport of parenting is twice exceptional parenting. And so I've had that. I've been in a position of having to help my mom with some things that's been, some really big decision making. So, we all have these things that draw on us, and having a reflective practice and trying to be really thoughtful and not shutting our feelings down, I
Mm.
think is going to help us more than anything, because at least then we can begin to find ways to live like and nurture those flames. It may not look like, like the perfect scenario, but it might be better than what the scenario you're in right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I love what you're pointing at too, is like every one of us as a working mom have some, whether you know it or not, is you actually, we all have this flame within us. Whatever that is that excites you or gets you into those high vibes or just like curiosity or whatever that is, I believe that every one of us has that. And how that comes to fruition into reality is dependent on each person.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're saying is like allowing yourself to find ways to tend to that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Whatever that looks like, and for you, Bree, I'm hearing it's like you were at a point in season in your life where you felt supported enough to tend to it in a way that worked for you. And that meant like a leap, another
Yeah.
leap, another leap. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, for those of you who are listening, it could be something different. It doesn't necessarily mean taking a leap.
Mm-hmm.
It might mean just like, it might be just getting curious and researching or, experimentation or just, getting curious. It doesn't mean that you have to quit and leave your job and go find a whole new career. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm really curious about like right now in the present moment in the work that you do, but also as a mom of a twice exceptional neurodivergent child, like what are some of the lessons that you have been just learning
Mm-hmm.
recently as parent and with your work, that because your work also works with parents with similar kids in that
Yeah.
vein. Yeah.
So what am I learning right now?
Yeah. Or what lessons have you yeah
Yeah,
learned
no,
along the
it's a
way?
great question. I'm sort of thinking about like, you know, some of the what I live by, there's a little bit of what I live by, and then there's a little bit of like what life is teaching me right now, which
Mm,
is, two different things, I think. So I've discovered a lot on my journey, and I really I am trying to do more of what I find myself telling clients, which
mm,
is so interesting because I mean, of course, I've been on my own journey
mm-hmm,
and I have a lot of wisdom that has come from my own journey. And I'll share some of that. But I also find that there's so much wisdom that comes out of like the co-creation of the coaching session that helps solidify my knowing even for my own family.
mm-hmm,
So, or like there's things that I've done with my own family that are helpful for other families. And it just reminds me like, okay, are you actively engaging in these strategies that you're helping others embrace? And sometimes I am. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, I kind of need to bring that back because that is really helpful. Or I'm sort of like half assing it and realizing like maybe I should formalize this again. So, that's the cool thing is there's like an accountability factor in my work, which I love. I really see myself as an ally with these parents. Like I'm a fellow parent on the journey, tripping over the rocks from time to time and really enjoying the meadows from time to time and that kind of thing. But because of my coaching training, I am able to offer some skills that I think is an added piece to what I can bring to somebody. So it's sort of like I can bring I get it, I'm there with you, and I've been there for 14 years. And I have these skills that will help us fine tune what you need or what you're trying to understand. And so what I find is such an interesting, like, merging of experiences. And the ally piece is part of what I've learned over time is that, and we need this, everybody in our lives. Every parent needs it. Every person needs it. We all need our allies. So, we hear of allies a lot within the context of marginalized communities. And I will go out on a limb and say neurodivergent communities are marginalized and that we do need allies. We need people who really understand what we're working with, and what we're navigating. And so, and a lot of times you don't find people, like even in the medical profession, who have a concept of what twice exceptionality is and what that might mean for behavior or for eating habits or things like that. And so if you find somebody who really gets it, and that isn't necessarily someone highly trained. It could be a fellow parent who's like, yep, I get it. I totally get it. But we need those people. So that is one thing that I found, that there's no way that my husband and I could have traveled this path with our daughter as well as we have without the people that we found. And one was a counselor at my daughter's school. There's been a couple different therapists. So we've found people who connect with our daughter, who we connect with, who we trust. Like, we all need that on our journeys as parents and certainly as people. I've also learned a lot about what it means to have boundaries. And part of that is about needs, that waffling that I did for so long about, like, oh, what do I need? And, oh, I can't take time off, or, oh, I can't go away for a weekend, or like all of that is bound up in a lot of old stuff. That's where like therapy can come into play and help us with these things. But also like really recognizing, like, okay, well, where can I set a boundary that will be healthy for me, but also healthy for my family? Like, meaning if I were to step out and let my husband take the reins for a little bit, like, actually that might be better for everybody. And so I think that's a hard process. Like, it can help to have people to like talk to about these things. Some people are really good at boundaries. So if a listener out there is like, yep, got that in the bag, then I'm like, right on, because we need that so badly, especially when we're really taxed as parents and working parents. I mean, like, working parents, they're just juggling even more. So, and then compassion, really finding that place where we have self-compassion, where you're not perfect people. Like, as parents, we want to be perfect. We want to do all the right things for our kids.
Yeah.
But there's no such thing. There's no perfect human. And so that's like the first place of compassion. But there's compassion in all forms, like compassion for your partner, compassion for your child, even if they're misbehaving. Like, behavior comes from somewhere. So anyway, there's a lot there. Yeah, I'll stop there because I could go on, and I don't want to just be lecturing or anything.
But I love that, because my thought as you were sharing, like, the boundaries and self-compassion, right? And like, I was thinking, my question was like, what would be the best I guess guidance for us as working parents, especially working parents who have neurodivergent and twice exceptional kids, right? I am a parent of a neurodivergent child as well. And when you said that is a marginalized, group of people, I totally understand that as well. Just trying to advocate for my daughter, but also, I'm not I myself am not neurodivergent, so trying to understand that
Yeah.
experience, right? So as a working parent, how do you, like in your work with parents, I'm sure most, a lot of them are working parents too, or working moms, but
Mhm.
like what are some of the guidance that you can maybe, I mean, I'm also selfishly asking for myself too, you know,
Mhm.
that, parenting a neurodivergent child, which is such their superpower, right? That's my
Mhm.
narrative that I have with my daughter. But also like, I don't want to use the word balance, but how do you parent and also like honor your own needs, but also you have your kids' needs? It's different from a very just,
Mhm.
in air quotes, normal. I don't like to say that, but, but like,
Well, there are norms, right? Like I think that there really are societal, social norms. There's a reason why there's neurodivergent versus like neurotypical, so to
neurotypical.
speak.
Okay.
You know, it's a real thing.
Mhm.
Um, so, so there's lots of different ways to approach this, but I would say that in some ways it's a paradigm shift. So
Mhm.
when So a lot of times what we want to be able to do as parents of neurodivergent kids is we want to be able to give our child skills to do all the things that other kids do and do it
Socially.
yeah,
Mhm.
socially,
Mhm.
academically, like, to handle a whole school day and not come home and be a mess,
Mhm.
for example, to be able to go to a birthday party and not melt down, to be able to, write a paragraph without it taking 2 hours.
Mhm.
So, these are things that's where we start typically. It's like, how can we get the kid therapy or a tutor or the services or the accommodations that they need to do the things that most kids do, or at least to have like a tweak that will help them be in the same place as all the other peers. So, and sometimes it's going to work. Like sometimes kids will still thrive, and sometimes you find amazing people. Like I have a client who has like an amazing tutor for her kids, and I'm like, right on, because
Mhm.
she's neurodivergent, her kids are neurodivergent. She's found an awesome person who can help her kids. So like, that is possible, and I'm not saying it's not. But there can be times, and I think it's frequent, when we start thinking that we're doing something wrong because our child is not doing the things that we are expecting them to do, even with all the resources that we put into them. So whether it
Mhm.
be therapy, whether it be advocacy at school,
Mhm.
all of those things that we're striving for them. And it's a scary place to be because one, if we're blaming ourselves or saying, what have we done wrong? Then that's a really harsh thing. But also, like, what's wrong with my child? These are very normal. Like, that's normal. Like, I want to normalize that. But I
Mhm.
also want to normalize that out of the box kids are not that abnormal. Like, they exist.
Mhm.
And we're often trying to fit them into a system and a structure that is really hard for them. And so that's where I feel like, yeah, sometimes we just have to be in the public school system. We don't have money for private school. We don't have money for a tutor. I would say that if you think there's a private school that might work better for your child because there's lower number of students or whatever, like don't be ashamed to ask about financial aid. Like there are options to consider potentially. So, don't hold yourself back from looking at options. It doesn't mean you have to choose anything, but it's really about like asking the question of maybe, or asking the question of, is everything that I think about parenting true?
Mm.
And what makes it true?
Mhm.
There's no one way to parent, honestly. and I'm talking within the realm of safety for the child. Like, obviously, I don't believe in anything that is going to like severely harm a child. But I'm saying, like, in general, there is no one way to parent. And my whole thing is that we need to parent the child that's in front of us. And neurodivergence equals uniqueness that is not within like the norm of like the population. So, like, so when you look at like a bell curve, so for a gifted child, for example, they're going to be higher on an IQ scale. And then you're going to have like the average in the middle, which is like, IQ of 100 and thereabouts. And then you're going to have the other end, which is on the lower end of the IQ scale. So you can look at that bell curve in the same way in terms of abilities or strengths and challenges. So, you could have a child who has like amazing verbal ability, and that's like far beyond their peers. And then and then that same child may actually have real challenges with remembering things, or like, you give them 3-step chore and they're like, can do step 1 and then they forget the rest. So that's like a whole nother thing. But so there can be like areas of challenge that kids have that is below their peers, and they can have strengths that are above their peers. And that's essentially what twice exceptionality is when you have a child who's like really have these like far and away strengths, but then they have these challenges, and it can be social challenges. It can be like social communication issues. And that's like on like below their peers. And then they're struggling horribly. So trying to put them into like sort of typical conventional school environment is going to be really hard for them, because that's where their needs are not going to be easily met for a variety of reasons. So when I say paradigm shift, it's to say that if you have a child that doesn't seem to be like basically okay in like the typical environments that we bring our kids to, whether it be the zoo or whether it be school, or, and they're really struggling and there's like big behaviors, something's going on there, and there's nothing wrong with your child. It's just that something's going on. And it's also not about a failure on your part. It goes back to needs. It's like, what are the needs of your child? And then what are your needs? Like, there's always this balance point of your needs. But if you're to start with your child, just given like you're a parent, and so you want to help your child, the first step I would say is not to think something's wrong with them, but to say, how are they different? And how can I support their difference in a way that allows them to feel safe and allows them to feel like capable, that they're not then internalizing this shame about like having a meltdown at the zoo or something.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, that's very helpful, because, as you were saying, that last part is like the word acceptance of your child being who they are. But also I find that, myself as a parent, but also I think even in my past career as an educator, is experiencing, it takes courage to have acceptance of what's in front of you.
Yeah.
Especially with what you're experiencing with your child, right? Whether that's like they're having a meltdown in the middle of the, zoo, or like, in front of my friends, like it takes a lot of courage to have that acceptance of like, this is what I'm experiencing as a parent, and this is my child. And I'm like wondering for you, like, how did you come to have that courage to accept, like, it is acceptance. It's not like raising the surrender flag, but it's like what you said, it's like being present to what is the needs that are in front of you, and not trying to avoid it, or trying to like, avoid it, or like disregard, or, like pretend it's not there, which, I have experienced as an educator with parents, that, and myself, like I went through that own phase of like, no, my child can't be neurodivergent. No, that's like, why, there's this whole, like, I think that's just old stories
Yeah,
growing
well,
up,
it's sort
right?
of like denial, right?
Denial.
Because
Yes. Denial.
yeah, there is a little bit of wanting to be in that place. And also like, if you're seeing something you don't understand, you're probably going to try and put it into some category, right? Because that's how we feel like we have some control, is we're going to put it into a category that makes some form of sense. So, and sometimes that's going to involve some form of denial. So what I have to say is that this is so I really truly believe that parenting is not something that we just figure out. Like, I mean, some kids are much easier. And I have my moments of like, oh my God, I'm so envious of those people who can just go places and do things and not have to think twice about it. And, for me, it really started, and I think this is what happens is you get to a crisis point, is on some level there's some form of crisis. And that's what happened with us. We were seeing certain behaviors that were like quick to frustration and a sort of default to anger with my daughter, which looking back to me showed that like she was under a lot of stress. But we didn't really take action until she was having her own anxiety problems, like big anxiety. And that was when we're like, okay, we're going to get her a counselor. And then we relied on the counselor to help guide us. So this was not, I mean, you have to be on a learning journey. Like this journey of parenting is a learning journey. This is not about you needing to know everything. Because sometimes I think that we feel like we're supposed to know how to do this parenting thing. And honestly, sure, there's lots of parenting books out there. They're going to give you tricks and tips. And sometimes they're going to help you a lot. And sometimes they're just not. With neurodivergent kids, it's a much more customized needs. The need there is more of a custom need because your child is really different from the norm. So it's a journey of courage for sure. When you said that, I was like, that's the other C. I have an ABCs, and it's like allies, boundaries, compassion, and courage. And courage sort of like envelops them all. It envelops the whole experience. Is you need to have courage. So you need to have courage to take the leaps that I took. You need to have courage to ask an administrator, like, is there anything we can do for my child? To take some time off from work when you feel like there's no one to back you up, but you have like a week of vacation. Take a vacation day, like either for yourself or to like try and figure something out for your child. Like sometimes we do not allow ourselves the time that we actually have, the support that we actually have. I get it. I understand that like if you're not at work one day, you might have a mountain of emails to go through. But if it means that you can address something or begin to understand something about your child that will help, it's going to help everybody. So it's things like that I think are really important to be keeping in mind as we're trying to support these kids, especially when they hit these crisis points. Like that's when people take action, is the crisis points. And that's not a bad thing. It just means that, there's a need there. And it's going to take a lot of effort and time for you to find a way of understanding your child. Because sometimes, children need to grow to the point where they can even articulate. And one of the key things is trying to build a relationship of trust between you and the child. So, and that's a whole nother thing in terms of shame versus like things are hard. It's easy to think like something is wrong, you're misbehaving, you're being manipulative. Why are you ruining everything for us? And yet there's something going on that needs to be addressed, and there's some suffering happening. And so I caution people about the language of what's wrong with you, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. What I'm hearing here is I love how I'm like the theme here I'm here is really about like courage to address the needs of not just like our children, but us as working parents.
Yeah.
Like having the courage to like you said, take that vacation day to address your needs and also to address because when you address your needs, you're also addressing the needs of your child, right? Like
Mhm.
whether, if I have like a free afternoon today, right, I'm going to, address my needs by taking a walk, but also that will make me be able to be present to address my daughter's needs when she comes home from school.
Yeah.
That's just having the courage to be clear about, you know,
Mhm.
saying those needs that you were
Something
talking
that might
about.
help you. Like, that's what
Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
always thinking about is
Help you.
what supports your well-being? What supports the well-being of your family? What supports the
Mhm.
well-being of your child? This is so if we're really to go back to me, it's so
Mhm.
difficult for me to tell my story in any succinct, short way and that's partly me, but I really feel like this has been so much a journey of discovery of like of what I need and what my child needs and what my husband needs. I've had to learn a lot about communication. The coaching program was amazing just for listening skills. So like if anybody wants to grow as a parent, learn how to listen, like active listening. It's so amazing. So, I mean, there's just things like go on a personal growth journey. And this doesn't mean having to spend a ton of money. This is not about that. But figure out how you can begin to honor yourself as well as honor the people in your family in such a way where you're not doing it alone, but you're committed to it.
Ooh, I
And
love that.
and give yourself time because honestly, that is the thing that's made all the difference in the world is time.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen overnight. There's no solution that's going to happen overnight because people change. Our kids are going to change. My daughter's just had a really recent diagnosis just this last 2023, and her first diagnosis was in like 2018, I believe. And so, it's a journey of understanding who we're working with, as a parent. And then we're also probably discovering things about ourselves. Like a lot of parents who have neurodiverse kids are neurodivergent themselves, and they don't realize it until they learn that about their kids. And so, it's like give yourself time to grow and develop and don't be hard on yourself. Like, God, it's so easy to be hard on yourself. I'm great at it because I'm a perfectionist. And so I'm having to constantly look at that for myself of like, okay, if I am just to be a real human being who doesn't have to be perfect, then what does that mean for parenting? It's
Mhm.
scary to not be a perfect parent sometimes.
Mhm. Mhm. I love how you're wrapping this all up, Bree. It's like it was such a great wrap up and as we end our time together, like it really boils down to like your well-being. I love that phrase, right? It's the well-being of yourself as a working mom and parent, but also the well-being of your child. Really, and today we were talking really about having neurodivergent, twice exceptional children, right? And
Mhm.
also the well-being of your family. And it having the courage to take the time and allow yourself time to
Mhm.
tend to our needs of our well-being and allowing ourselves time to do that is it takes courage actually
It
because
does.
it takes a lot of courage. I like that as part of your C, compassion and courage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Allies, boundaries, compassion, and courage.
Yeah.
Yep. And I have sat with that for a very long time, for a number of years. And I'm like, yep, it still holds true. So,
Yeah.
and really what that, as far as what that looks like for each person, it's going to be really different. And, really it's about that reflective practice of being able, and this does not mean you have to journal every day, like whatever. Like if it's just like reflecting while you're driving to the store, like that's good enough. I mean, I'm all about just making things accessible, but I really, really believe like, who are the people who might get it for you, like your experience, and like your podcast is great because it's like, okay, we're working moms here. This isn't necessarily an easy thing, but we can make things better. But I do think it requires courage and it requires thought and running things by people and allowing ourselves to be imperfect.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. I love how you really define like allies. It's like how you define people who are, like you said, that get it, or that just, it doesn't need to be, it can be a friend, it could be a therapist, it could be a counselor, it could be a coach, whatever that is for you, right? It could be this podcast, right? You listen to an episode, you're like, oh, they get it. Like I heard this story. I can see myself resonate with Bree's story and just this conversation. Like you feel seen. Right? Like you feel seen, you feel heard, you know that you're not alone, because in in this journey of like parenting and being a working mom, there is no perfection. I mean, I'm a recovering perfectionist as well. Very hard to release from that. But all to say is that like we're all learning along the way. And so thank you so much, Bree, for sharing your story and also just your wisdom and insight and offering a lot of great coaching questions. So y'all, if you want to rewind and re-listen and take note a lot about all the coaching questions she's offered to us as working moms and parents, like to help you be self-reflective, because there's intentionality with that. And in hearing in your story, Bree, like that practice of being self-reflective, like has really guided your own path as a working mom and as a parent in, figuring out this parenting journey too with your daughter. So thank you so much for sharing and your authenticity. I really appreciate you as a person and just what you shared with me and our audience today.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It was lovely to talk to you.
Yeah. And before we wrap it up, how can people connect with you? Is there something that as a parent coach that you like to offer or have anything to offer for our audience?
Yeah. Well, so I have my website and it's breeoverly.com. And I also do parent coaching for gifted and twice exceptional kids through a psychotherapy group called Gifted Together. And Gifted Together, you can actually go there and complete an inquiry form. So like if you were actually interested in working with me, then you can go to giftedtogether.org/contact. And then there's information there about filling out like a inquiry form and getting started there. But if you want to know more about me as a specific person who does coaching in parenting, but also I do life coaching for neurodivergent individuals as well. And so that's all on my website.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with that. And if you are interested and curious about all that Bree just shared, I will link all that information in the show notes. And thank you again for being on the show again, Bree.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, y'all. Once again, thanks for tuning in today. If you have not subscribed to our podcast, go ahead and click subscribe so you don't miss out on future stories here on the Empower Working Mom Revolution podcast. And lastly, support the podcast by being a podcast sponsor. We are looking for sponsors as our podcast continues to grow. And as a sponsor, your donation supports the podcast and enables us to create and spread more heartwarming stories of working moms worldwide. This helps every mom feel acknowledged, understood, and a part of a supportive community. So please consider making a one-time or monthly donation to support the podcast. And as a thank you, your name will be added to our podcast website's thank you sponsors list. You can click the link in the show notes to donate $7 or choose your preferred amount, and we really appreciate your support. So have a great rest of your week. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.